Hello, lovely to see you. Hope you're having a great afternoon. Hello, Vary. Hello, Carrie. Lovely to see both of you, and I'm seeing that more of you are coming. I'm TK, and I would like to welcome you to this webinar. It's one of these relaxed ones. There will be no breakouts. Hopefully, you'll enjoy it, and I will not ask much of you. But what would be cool is, if you share stuff in the chat so I can interact with you. I'll just make sure that I'll look at your messages and reply. Ishtar, lovely to see you. So, you know what usually happens in these webinars? People ask, okay, where are you from? What is it that the weather's like? But I have a bit of a different question for you today. And it's not a question that you need to necessarily answer in the chat, but if you'd like to, feel free. So, remember to the time when you've last quit your job. You've left your job at your own volition. Why did you do that? You don't have to, again, share. But what would be cool is think about it because we'll use it further down the line. It's definitely a story that I'll say. Gail, lovely to see you, and Victoria, lovely to see you too. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope you'll enjoy the chat. Yeah, I've had burnout. But before we go there, let's talk about what is it that you'll get from today. So, you probably know Simon Sinek and his mantra of starting with why. What I'm going to talk about first is, why is this important? Why should you care about engagement, retention, and performance management? Next, we'll get to what. What are these sincere one-to-ones and how do they work? And finally, I'll answer the question of the webinar, which is how. How do they fix these problems? How is it that they help you deal with that? How do they help your managers work differently? Feeling inadequate. It was so long ago. Actually, that's a perfect segue, Valerie, to a story that I want to say. Well, usually, it's probably best that I tell my own story. I could tell you about my clients, but I usually think that telling my own story is something that's really authentic. So it seems to be a tradition now that when I have these webinars, I am showing you a photo of when I was young. So be warned. It's not that cringy though, because that's me. It's myself and actually only a part of my team. There's actually yet another person outside of the frame. But this is a month before I submitted my resignation letter from a company that I've been a wonderful team leader of this particular team. Now, the interesting thing here, and I think this photo is a great metaphor because I felt like I'm in a fog. I felt like, okay, yeah, all right, there's a nice hike, but there's something happening here. I am leading, but where to? I felt incredibly lost, and someone actually said that burnout is, and I think, that's what I actually felt at the time, although I didn't use that name. The challenge was I was actually quite successful. Things were happening okay. I didn't have problems, results were great. My team really liked me, but the challenge was that I felt rudderless. I actually felt like I didn't know where I was going. The interesting thing was that after a while, the only thing that gave me any proper joy at work is actually thinking about leaving it, and so I did. But before I handed my resignation, I actually had a chat with my boss, with my manager, and we had this wonderful, that you might definitely know as an annual review. And we went through the process, and I could see that he can see that there's something that, we're not talking about, but he didn't praise it. Afterwards, when, I went to the HQ and I gave him my resignation letter, he said, yeah, I knew, TK. I just had a hunch because at your annual review, you felt like you're a wreck. That's the actual words he used. But the interesting thing is that, he was a good boss. I really liked him. We had a good relationship. Everything worked well between us. But the challenge is that there was something missing. I didn't feel like I had the opportunity to talk to him about my problem, about why I felt the way I felt. So everyone was surprised. And I could have added so much more. And I'm sure, looking at where you've left your work, a lot of you are talking about reorganizations and redundancies, right? But you didn't really have a choice there. But the question is, if you had a choice when you left, why did you leave, right? And I think one is feeling inadequate. I also felt inadequate at the time. But moving on a bit, what's important is to talk about what I am and who I am now, I guess, right? So it's probably best that I introduce myself. I'm TK. As you probably know, I'm helping managers and training them with the framework of sincere one-to-ones. I'm really focusing on that, and I'll be talking about that some more today. And I'm a professional coach and a trainer, and you can see all kinds of, references, testimonials, and certificates on my LinkedIn profile. So I won't bore you with that. But that's me. What I would love to know is something about yourselves. So who are you? Well, instead of just maybe forcing you to type a lot, and hey, Maria Elena, lovely to see you. What I would love you to do is, as a simple way, use the chat. And if you find yourself to be an HR person, put A in the chat and send a message. If you are an L&D person, put B. C for a leader and D for neither. Just a wonderful human being. You can put a combination in. I'm definitely a person that would put a combination in, but feel free to put it. Thank you so much, Vanessa. Lovely to see you. And thank you for everyone tuning in. So, all right. So as you introduce yourselves, just with letters, because as I've promised, it's a relaxed webinar. Let's move ahead, because I'm here to answer my first question, which is, why should you care? What's so important? Okay, I've told you a story, but you're here to hear about engagement, retention, and performance management. Why is this important? Why should you care? All these wonderful B and Ds and A's. Well, there's a couple of reasons. So let me go through them. By the way, I'll be showing some numbers. And there's an article on my LinkedIn profile where I reference the sources. Again, I won't bore you with that, but you can check it out and check the original reports. But let's start with engagement. There's an engagement epidemic that we're living through. Gallup actually found that only 23% of employees worldwide are classified as engaged. Sadly, it would seem that, at least from my experience, it is something that isn't surprising at all. The big question is how is it changing? But if you look at the longitudinal data, you will see that people really struggle. Now, you can't contribute well if you're disengaged. Your wonderful organization will probably not succeed if people are disengaged. And, the question is what to do about it. But we'll get to that, because another thing that companies really struggle with is retention. Of the top businesses, you can easily see that 63%, and there's a great company, Trident, that actually surveyed a lot of businesses between 50 and 500 strong. 63% are actually struggling with retention. If you're an L&D or especially HR, how difficult this problem is. How much it costs you to lose talent, lose employees. It definitely has cost a lot in terms of the company I told you of, which is the one I left, to lose me. Theoretically, it would have done something, but we'll talk about it next. Finding a person that would fit, getting them up to speed, taking a gamble, it's a huge cost. Why would you waste talent letting people leave? Because, as many of you said, you feel undervalued, or you feel like you're missing something or taken for granted or burned out. Something needs to be done. Also, what's a huge challenge is, and I've told you about it, like only 8% of companies are happy with their performance management processes. Like annual reviews, please. One would say that was one of the reasons why I left. I didn't have a chance to talk to my manager properly, sincerely. It's just an annual review. And even on that moment, when we had this long conversation, he did not make an observation that, yeah, something is clearly wrong, right? And I can tell you countless stories that are quite similar. But if you look in your heart and if you look into yourself and also the employees in your organizations that you so much care about, you will probably see the same. I understand that there's the annual process and it's like a running train and it's so hard to change because there's merit increases, there's evaluation periods. It's all a machine, a locomotive that has been running for decades and decades. But you can definitely do more than just the bare minimum of ticking the boxes. And I think you can ask your organization and your managers to do more. Now, the question is like, TK, okay, well, what? What is it that you can do? And Vanessa, thank you for enjoying my personal story. I hope that, you can share yours, but maybe not in the chat, but maybe we can meet later on and you can share it. I always encourage people to share stories because we love hearing stories, don't we, as human beings? But getting back to it, what are you supposed to do, right? Looking at it, and if you type A or B, like what happens is you get these targets. The chief executive will tell you, well, the engagement survey came back and the results are abysmal. Or that's the cost of low retention. Or our performance management process doesn't make sense. Now, the big thing is, there are things you can do. Now, you can probably hire expensive consultants that will give you a bunch of PowerPoint slides, but I actually have a simple technique that you yourself can implement that will really make a difference. But the way to do that is through your managers. Now, I believe that the relationship between the employee and the manager has the biggest impact on the problems I've just mentioned. Like if you look at my story, if you look at your own stories, and if you look at the stories of people that you've seen leaving, there's a reason why people say that we leave the bosses and not the organization, not the companies. There's something that needs to change. There's something that isn't quite right when it comes to these relationships. And there's a relatively straightforward way to fix it. And yes, there isn't much of a spoiler for me to tell you that it's all about what I've been talking about. And if you've seen any of my content recently, any of my streams or webinars, I talk about sincere one-to-ones a lot. Over quite more than a decade of me working with organizations and managers, training them and coaching them, I have discovered that there's lots of circumstances when they are taught theoretical models. They are given advice that isn't practical. They are not been given the tools that they need to actually apply the day after the training. It's a huge challenge. So throughout the years of me supporting and helping managers, what I have noticed is there is one thing that matters the most in every manager's work to create the right relationship and to create the things we'll talk about next, which are the things that improve engagement, retention, and performance management, which is the one-to-one, the humble one-to-one. You definitely know what it is, and you can let me know in the chat, as in how one-to-ones are going in your organization. Sadly, in many organizations, they aren't great. They are either canceled, they are either not effective, or even not happening at all. Let me know in the chat what you think and what's your situation if you'd like to share. But what I have found is there are many ways of leading a one-to-one. What I, however, think is we need to be really straightforward and simple when helping our managers. They're so busy and there's so much on their head, especially if they're new first-time managers. It's important for them to step right in and make sure that things happen in a way that they can use easily and feel comfortable with. And this is why I came up with the framework of sincere one-to-ones. Some people ask me like, TK, why sincere? Like, it's a strange word. Some people say, well, I only am hearing sincere in the church or any kind of a temple, but I'm using it for that very purpose. Not because it's about the church, but it's about the fact that we're not using this word enough. Maybe it's because there's not enough sincerity in our places of not worship but work. Maybe even in our lives. Are people really sincere at work? I think they probably need to be quite more. And this is why I chose this word. But the interesting thing here is, well, you would ask, what are these sincere one-to-ones? If you haven't been to my previous webinar, you wouldn't know. Well, they're extremely simple. I actually wanted to have 3 principles of sincere one-to-ones. And try as I might, I only ended up with 2, which is possibly the right number of pillars. So let's talk about the first pillar, the first foundational practice of sincere one-to-ones, which is just have one-to-ones. I mean, I know, sounds silly, but half an hour every week, one-to-one with your employee, which is scheduled, respected, and actually not moved, not cancelled. The thing about it is, I'll talk about what it tells later on, but the basic thing is, you are showing as a manager that you're making an effort. The employee knows that the one-to-one is coming. The employee knows what to expect. This is a huge sign of respect and care. And the first step is sincerity. Yeah, some people would ask me, okay, TK, what about, I have 16 employees reporting to me, or like I never have the time on the shop floor. I get it. I do get it. There are different problems that don't let you have the hygiene to make sure it works. But when you think about that, as valid as these problems are, quite often what I hear is excuses. Excuses like, I don't want to have them, or my employees don't want to have them, or, this and that. Think about that. I've recently talked to a very experienced head of HR in a multinational corporation. What she told me is, when I pitched it to her, is like, oh, TK, our experienced managers don't need one-to-ones. And you know what? I respectfully disagreed. People do. People crave the time to build the right relationship. People, especially employees, need that. It's not enough just to have a team meeting. It's not enough to sit even by your employee, knowing that there's a special time to discuss stuff that we put into it to make sure that there's time for a proper one-to-one in a safe environment is incredibly valuable. And time again, my experience and the experience of my clients, and I'm sure that the experience of you, would say that this is something that's really needed. So I'm just looking at the chat, Vanessa and Valerie, what you said, yes, they're not regular. And, this is something that it's not being adhered to and it's being skipped. This is why I only have the 2. Like, I'm not telling you, this is the scenario and take notes like this. No. Let's get down to the basics. Let's make sure they're being had. But then again, I said there's 2 principles. So what's the second one, you might ask? Well, I'm going to show you. If you have half an hour, give the employee half of this time and ask them to speak first. Oh, okay. Another one, I promised to, and they're really simple. But think about that. Think about the simplicity of this act of like really intently listening, of deeply listening to the person and having to sit there as a manager for 15 minutes to actively listen to someone. Many managers, I'm sure that are probably maybe not even capable of that. It's like, you know what? not capable of sitting down for 15 minutes listening attentively to a person? See, it's deceptively simple and yet so powerful. The show of respect that you give to the employee by asking them to go first tells them and shows them, if you really mean it, if you're really sincere, that you care, that you're there to listen, that they are important for you. You see, and I had the conversation like this with my boss down in the and back in the days of the fog. Maybe not straight away, maybe not initially, but I probably would have told him that I was burned out, that I don't know where I'm going. He might have had a problem with that. He might not know what to do with that. But the thing is, at least you would have the conversation. At least it would build the sincerity. Now, obviously, there's the second half about what's important to the manager. Let's not neglect that. You know, I've mentioned continuous performance management, and this is where it happens. If you build sincerity, if you build the right space in these conversations, people will really want to contribute. If your managers can build what I would say is psychological safety, which I will get to next, having a conversation about performance isn't a problem. Deceptively simple, Vanessa. Thank you for the quote, and thank you for everyone contributing so much. Yeah, Maria Elena, I'm lovely to see that your manager does this really well. Some managers just have a natural talent to that. You know, it's interesting. When I was looking for the photo, I found this particular lovely lady, and I've asked my wife, isn't she overexcited? But then again, I guess not, because this is how active listening looks like. Look at the joy on her face. I know it's a candid photo, but if I had a boss that would listen to me like that and, you know, impart so much joy, why would I ever leave an organization, even if I was underpaid and underutilized, even burned out? It just matters so much, doesn't it? But hey, I promised you more, right? So let's go to the final question I promised we will answer, which is how. And we will spend most of our time in here, because we now will go through some important concepts, and I would love to know what you think about that. So, first of all, how the hell are these two simple principles, foundational practices, and by the way, there's more nuance to it, but, you know, let's start with the basics, can alleviate, fix the three problems I've mentioned earlier. After all, these sound quite big. I've mentioned global numbers, large samples of data. Well, there's ways that they do that, and let me expose it a bit. Let me reveal the curtain and talk about what actually happens for people when they have these conversations. So the first thing that gets built is psychological safety. Let me know if you know what it is. If you don't, it's essentially the feeling, the atmosphere, the social construct between people. It can be with groups. It doesn't just have to be with two people. That people believe that it's safe to be themselves, that it's safe to express emotions, that it's safe to express vulnerability, that it's okay to talk about mistakes, that they are being accepted. I think someone has mentioned, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the name, that didn't feel like they belonged, right? Maybe the organization didn't give them psychological safety. Maybe when I had conversations with my boss about, you know, allocation of funds and targets and all other things I talked to him about when I was managing a portfolio of people, they were very transactional. They were okay. We absolutely did not fight, and we even liked each other. But where was there psychological safety for me to say that, you know what, I don't know where I'm going? If you reflect on that, if you go back to your story, or the stories of people that you know, that's a major reason why things don't work. So psychological safety, according to Gallup, can reduced turnover by 27% and increased productivity by 12%. Again, there's a post on my LinkedIn profile going through all the reports and linking them. Now think about that. Sincere one-to-ones, having one-to-ones, they create this psychological safety as long as you get the manager to actively listen and you actually have them. Sure, it's not as simple as that, you might say, but if you start with the basics, if you start with the manager turning up and doing this simple act of listening and then talking about, okay, what's important for them and being really active, it will build. It will inevitably build, because at the end of the day, as people, we want to talk about stuff that's important to us. I'm not saying to, many frameworks and agendas of one-to-ones, like force people to talk about their home life. Ask them difficult questions, tricky ones. Many people ask me, how do you start a sincere one-to-one? Just, hey, what's going on for you? Or what's been happening during the last week? Or what would you like to talk about? What's important for you now? Simple questions. At the end of the day, if there's something that's happening, it's probably wanting to get out. As a professional coach, believe me, I know it takes years to learn how to ask the right questions. But if you spend enough time as a person, it will emerge. So psychological safety, and there is a nice study by Google, Project Aristotle, which is, by the way, something that I will talk about on my next webinar, more on that later on, has a tremendous impact. And yes, many of you might say that, it's also important to build psychological safety in teams. The organization should build psychological safety. Can you have psychological safety in an unsafe organization? These are valid questions, but you need to start somewhere. There's a reason why I'm talking about managers. Higher managers or senior leaders are also managers too. The thing is, it needs to start somewhere. Someone needs to take the first step. You see, I could possibly say that I should take the initiative if I look back at the time that I've told you the story about of me leaving work and build it with my boss myself. But to be honest, everyone can be a leader if they want to, but if you are an appointed leader, if you took this mantle of leadership, or you have managers that did so, what happens is, I sincerely believe it's their responsibility to build this. It needs to start from somewhere. I'm not necessarily thinking that, a chief executive can implement psychological safety just by decree or just by putting a poster on the wall. It doesn't work like that. I think most of you here probably know that it's all about where it matters at the coalface. People are looking up to leaders, the line leaders most. And yes, if a leader is struggling to implement that, they have a leader themselves probably, and it's their job in their sincere one-to-ones to help them with performance, because building this is an important element of a performance of a manager. All right, there's more. So the next thing, which I think is quite important and is the next element that has a huge impact on it, is the right relationship between the manager and the employee, right? Even if you have this psychological safety, there's something we need to talk about. You see, being a manager, being a leader, as you know, if you work in HR and L&D, it's not that you can just be the employee's friend, but you also shouldn't be a taskmaster tyrant. Many people really struggle with this duality. Like, the way I usually talk to managers about it is you have two friends and you need to balance it. You have two interests, which don't have to be conflicting, but sometimes they might be at odds. On one hand, I remember the story when I first became the manager, or a manager. I had I've told the story in my previous webinar, but essentially I was the head of HR, a very experienced lady, and I was quite young back then. And her name was Agnieszka, still is. She's nearing retirement. And she told me and two other managers that now you're supposed to represent the interest of the company. And it has stuck with me ever since. Because as a manager, you have to balance the interest of the company with the interest of the employee. I'm not going to tell you what the right balance is. It depends on your organization, and many people and organizations have many different philosophies. But this important bit, and thank you for appreciating the language, Vanessa, is that as though you are there as a manager, or your managers are there to evaluate, to look at performance, because we're there to do a job. Our organization will not exist if we fail to deliver. We won't have a job, or people won't have a job. Everyone will suffer. So we need to talk about it, but also, even if the manager is delivering harsh feedback to the employee, even if there is some behavior they want them to change, it's important for the employee to know that at the end of the day, even if they're hearing these difficult words, the manager has their back, right? I'm not saying tough love. What it means is the manager is saying that, holding the interest of the company, but also having the interest of the employee in mind. This balance is absolutely crucial to achieve. And I think more often than not, what happens is, because managers are being pushed by senior leaders to deliver, because what else? They often fall out of balance. They quite often go into this mode of driving too much, which can lead where it obviously can lead. But the thing is, sincere one-to-ones, as you have seen and heard, because you give employee and show the employee that they have the time, and you give them the space, you build up psychological safety. And if you are really sincere in doing that, and your managers are doing that, you will be able to create that. Now, as you said, Vanessa, you might like this simplicity, but in many ways, there are many times when obviously people will challenge that, right? So let's talk about some cases where, even though, as you're listening to this webinar, you might think it makes perfect sense. But talking to quite a few managers and doing it for years, I have heard many objections. In fact, a nice one, or a very interesting one, is the one I have heard in half of January this year, where, it's all well and good, but we're just so political. No one can reveal their true face. No one can be sincere in the organization. And that's really sad. It's really difficult to hear. And this is why there's engagement, retention, and performance problems, right? Okay, fine. Every organization works as it's permitted. Survival is optional. Drucker's over there. Deming isn't. But the interesting thing here is change needs to start from somewhere. What needs to happen is someone needs to take the first step. Don't wait for your employees to do that. I mean, I've not necessarily heard of situations when employees unionize and ask for psychological safety. I don't know if you did, but I did not. And there's a reason for that, right? This is not something that normally we expect from work. But if the only thing we expect from work is the hygiene factors of, being reasonably paid and not toxic, probably won't be able to grow our organizations to what we need them to be and help your managers and have the engagement everyone dreams about so much in terms of the success. I've got a cool question by Vivek. Thank you for your comment. AI. Yes, how do you build AI into the process? Well, it's the first time it's not the first time I'm mentioning AI in my webinars. It's a wonderful tool. I don't want to be, maybe sarcastic, but AI is there to augment how we work. I think it can create wonderful opportunities. And, that's a real question. Everything is about AI nowadays. One of the questions that people often ask me is about taking notes. One of the questions that people ask me is about tracking actions. I think when it comes to transcripts, when it comes to summarizing, AI is absolutely brilliant. But don't outsource this important relationship to an artificial being. Don't outsource your humanity to an AI. The sincere relationship and psychological safety is there because we see the other human being. Tools are there to be used and help us with that. But sometimes we think that these things are difficult, and they are. Being with another person and creating this sincere and atmosphere and psychological safety is difficult for many people. We should acknowledge that. There's a reason why we have these problems, and it's because these conversations can most of the time get difficult. What if, for instance, someone asks you for a raise, but you can't? You don't have the budget. What if they want to get a promotion, but their numbers aren't adding up and they're not performing? It's a difficult conversation for many. What if you need to go for a round of redundancy and tell a person that they're unfortunately tagged? Outsourcing it to AI or doing it via Zoom, sometimes, this is a good platform, is something that I would really think about if it builds the right atmosphere and engagement that will be able to help. Anyway, tangent. As we're nearing the end of this webinar, and hopefully you're enjoying the stories, I wanted to ask about something. I wanted you to write something in the chat yet again, which is, you know what, as the webinars usually end, there's like a CTA, and I'm supposed to have like a special offer for you. Sign up to my course, get my ebook, sign up to my mailing list. I mean, yes, that's important too, and you can do all that, and you can find all of it in my profile. And, if you need help with what I talked about, I'm making it easy to be found. But what I would love from you is actually to give me a different gift. There's a different call to action that I have for you, which is, tell me what you're taking away from this. What is it that these 35 minutes, nearing 45, have changed for you? What is it that you have learned? Or maybe what is it that you're taking away and tomorrow, on Wednesday, you're actually thinking about implementing? I look at the chat messages, but what I'm taking away from this wonderful conversation with you on the chat, and thank you so much, so many of you, for coming and giving me that, is it really resonates with people, right? It really resonates with a lot of you that have put in A's and B's and C's when I've asked you. It is an important problem, but for it to be solved, for it to really work, what is absolutely needed is acknowledgement of the fact that it's a difficult matter. It's not something that, despite of its simplicity, is easy to change. And I'm not making a pass on my, consulting services and training. But if you think about sincere one-to-ones, a great thing about them is that it's a bit of a pyramid. If you get enough people doing them in your organization, all levels of leadership, this becomes the element of performance of managers. And if you've got a senior manager, them having sincere one-to-ones and talking about performance of how the line managers that report to them are doing one-to-ones can really grow it. That's important, I think, for people to acknowledge the fact that it's not that easy, right? And I think every change starts by acknowledging the problem. Thank you so much for your wonderful comments. I would love to see you on my next webinar, and I probably will get in touch with many of you. Thank you so much for spending the time with me. At the end of the day, I wanted to thank you for your attention. Let me just push the right button. Oh, there it is. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for joining me. The next webinar, which actually will be even more about psychological safety and the work that Google did, is on the 18th of March. Same time as now. With that, I wish you all the best for your day. Hope to see you soon. And have a nice, psychologically safe and sincere week. Bye-bye.